This ranch has been in my husband's family for over 105, 6 years, somewhere in there. My husband's father was running it, and he had kind of always said to us that he wasn't going to leave the ranch to us and that he was going to donate it to Nature Conservancy. And so, we were fine with that. That was his choice to make. And we were both working for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the time. And he got sick, unfortunately, suddenly and passed away rather quickly. And lo and behold, he had left the whole ranch to us. And so, we both had federal jobs, which means, we had things like health insurance and paid leave and all those kind of things. And we had to decide overnight whether we were going to become cattle ranchers or not. And I was a resounding yes, and my husband was a resounding no, because he is raised here and he knew how much work this was gonna be. And so when we got here, there was about 120 head of cows and their calves, and um, his father had been in his 80s and he hadn't had a hired hand for a long time, so there was just a lot of broken infrastructure in place. And so I don't know if it was from being a wildlife biologist or what, but I just immediately took to the cattle. I was enamored at day 2. and so I knew I was never leaving after that. And what we ended up doing is my husband agreed to quit work for a couple of years and come help me sort of repair all that broken infrastructure that was on the ranch. And then he was clear that he was going back to an off-farm job after that. And really those 2 years got the basics put back together. I would say it took a decade to get it really operational again. Once things break, it's very expensive, and it's just a lot of hard work. And I was still just even learning cattle, and I come from a dryland farm, and so the irrigation was all new to me, and so I had to learn all. The learning curve was steep when I got here, for sure. So we're in the Moses Coulee, which if you haven't been out here, people should come and take an explore. This is the most westerly flood of Lake Missoula, and so we have 800-foot basalt cliffs on either side of us, and it's shrub steppe habitat. We also have 270 acres of irrigated farm ground in the bottom, and that's where our house here is located. The ranch is about 6,000 acres, which is plenty. And so our precipitation out here is we get about 9 to 12 inches of rain. So water is always going to be our limiting factor out here. There used to be a lot of outbuildings. They had barns and trees and all kinds of things. And it was all in apricots. And they froze out in the 1940s. And the only two remaining are those two trees over there.
Remind me what year it was that you and David came to own the ranch.
2011. Is that right? Yes, 2011.
So 13 years on the job here.
Yep.
Do you feel like you have adapted the ranch to what you want it to be, or are there still more changes or improvements you want to make?
I feel like I've just sort of arrived at our sweet spot. And what our sweet spot looks like is I have to run this place by myself. So it has to be manageable. And I have to make enough money that we don't put personal finances into our ranch. And so it has to, pay for itself. And it does that now. I haven't drawn a salary yet. That's the next step. So it's just been sort of paying for itself. But I think I'm close to being able to draw a salary too, which after 13 years, we've always kept track of it. And I can't remember how much the ranch owes me in back salary, but it's a lot of money. We won't ever probably pay that back. But that's just really the honest, thing about agriculture is that it's really hard to make a living at it when you are a small or mid-sized operator. So the cattle are now doing that though, and that's pretty exciting to me. So my goal is to have about 300, 350 head of other people's cows here during the grazing season.
Uh-huh.
And I've got, what do I have now? Like 280 here right now. So before, my business was a cow-calf operation, meaning I keep the cows through time, and then the calves are the cash crop each year. And it's so frustrating because when you show up to sell them, you're a price taker. You can't set your price. And so like if the market is down for who knows what reason on a particular day, and that's when you bring your calves in, you just have to take it.
Yeah.
And that I worked so hard at raising those calves, and to, you know, get maybe $1.20 a pound for them, it was just like, so this is great because I send the invoices out once a month, and they send me a check, and you know, it's, I know how much the money's going to be, so I can do some financial planning, and it's just been working out really good. And then my winters are pretty quiet. My average day is that there is no average day. I start out with a punch list every morning, and sometimes it gets filled out and completed, and sometimes one item is done and the rest of the day gets wrecked. So you just never know. When we first got here, I felt like I was sort of beholden to dead people. Like I felt like I was ranching for them, and that gets really complicated, you know, sort of mentally and emotionally. And so when I switched to, I'm just gonna do the best I can, that made things a lot better. Keeping large tracts of land intact is really hard. It's really, really hard.
And it's a generational responsibility.
It is.
Every generation has to like try and keep it together.
Yes.
Grow it if it needs to grow.
Yeah. And it's hard to right size that because, you know, I could be much bigger than I am, but there's just me, and, you know, there's no housing out here. So finding a hired hand is hard. And now with Washington's new like overtime laws, I couldn't afford a hired hand anyways. So you have to figure out how to keep this intact with what you've got, I think.
I don't know, seems like fun so far.
Yeah, right? This is like fresh air, sunshine. I never have to go to the gym.
I am getting paid for the fence work though, right?
Of course you are. I'm going to feed you. That's
okay.
your...
Fair deal.
Human-caused fires are a big deal for us, and we're not in a fire district here. So when we have a fire, we're on our own to deal with that. Like, I look back on it now, and it started as the worst thing that ever happened to me. And it actually started right up on that bluff. I was sitting eating lunch in the house at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and this weird little squall came through, and I saw the dry lightning, and it wasn't but seconds later, and there was smoke and then a line of flames coming over the hill. It landed on BLM ground, which started out to be a good thing because BLM showed up really quickly. The fire cruised south, mostly south, and then it got in that little canyon back there, and that's DNR ground. And so I thought, oh, okay, good, DNR is gonna get after that. And my cattle were all on the other side of the road, and so I wasn't worried. DNR is great at putting fire out, but they just didn't this time. And in the evening, I came down to check on it, and the winds just like picked up, you know how they do here, just so fast. It just picked up and the fire took off. And I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. And I went back to the house and got my border collie and my ATV and bombed down there on the old railroad bed and started getting my cattle up. And the fire just like leapt over the road and it just whooshed up behind us. And I was in my mind saying, I will grab my dog and drive away from these cattle if I have to. Like I was trying to prepare myself to not be stupid because it was very scary. But my dog, he was like, I know exactly what needs to be done here. And he got after those cows and he picked them up into a good fast trot, ran them the 2 miles back to the house. And it was hot and loud behind us. And it was the scariest thing that I've ever done. And I don't ever want to do that again. And I don't ever want anybody else to have to do that again. It caused a lot of bad feelings because you know, we had firefighters show up, but not engage with the fire because they weren't in anybody's district. And it wasn't really understood, like, who should do what when you're in unprotected lands, or no man's land, as some people call it. Because it was literally like, who's paying for this? We don't see anybody raising their hand that they're going to pay for this. So I learned that, you know, fire is devastating, but there are places that actually came back better after the burn. And so there was positives that way. And one thing that I really learned is that those firefighters that weren't engaging, I kept asking, like, why, you know, why, what's the reason? And they said, well, there isn't anything out here. And I was just like, holy smokes, they see this as nothingness, right? Like they're like, it's okay to let it burn because there's nothing out here. So on our fire, we feel like we lost about $283,000 worth of infrastructure. And then that's not including what to do with the cattle in the 2 years. I put a presentation together with the help of a Chelan fire chief who thought I probably better harness my anger in a positive way, which was a good choice. And I have gone around the state and given the presentation on the value of, I call it range ground because that seems to be the terminology that people can kind of wrap their mind around, and then tied it to the state's economic impacts and the cattle industry and you know, talked about how much a mile of fence costs to replace. And
Were you able to negotiate something from that point to where this area has some degree of fire protection now?
yes and no. There aren't enough people that live out in Palisades to pay for the level of service that would be expected if they annexed us in, right? Like the taxation isn't going to be enough to pay for doing fire suppression out here. We had the BLM come and talk to us about rangeland fire protection associations, which means that we would form, it's a 501c3 nonprofit. You get insurance, you have usually a board of directors of some kind, and you run it as a nonprofit. And then you can get surplus firefighting equipment once you're certified. And they use them in Oregon, and Idaho, and Wyoming, and all the time with great success on these places like this. And but they're not legal in the state of Washington. And so I did, I think, 5 rounds of legislation with Representative Tom Dent to get them legalized so that we could do that, because we felt like it was our only option. And it always gets turned down by the firefighters union, so they always fight it. And so we've never got there. But the piece of legislation that also Representative Dent got across the finish line 2 legislations ago was that local fire chiefs can call in air support on initial attack. And that's really important because before they couldn't until the fire had gone state mobilization. Well, like there was no getting equipment up there, right, to put fire out. If we could have got one dump of water on that, it could have all been done. And I said, well, can you also make it so that local fire chiefs can make that happen on land that's in unprotected lands that's adjacent to their districts? And so That has just been such a game changer. Last summer, that legislation had already gone through, and very ironically, some people were shooting on our ranch, and they caught it on fire. And I ran down to find the fire chief because I didn't know if they knew that legislation. It was fresh; they had just gone through. It was there, but as I got there, here comes helicopter one, and it was in ground like this where they couldn't get to it, and they put it out with 3 helicopter dumps. And so I think that is the piece that has been a game changer. Getting to know the adjacent fire chiefs, and that we're here, and they know us now and we know them, and you know I just don't feel like we're as alone in this as we used to be, because they don't want these fires to get ahead of steam here in unprotected land, because it's going to end up in their district rolling along at 14 miles an hour, if they don't catch it here. So I think we're all just figuring it out. So this cave, and this is the version of the story we know. Like, it might not be 100% accurate, but the Appledale Fruit Company, that the old house that we were at, they wanted to store apricots in this cave, and then when they went in it, there was all kinds of artifacts. They would come down, sort of off the Waterville Plateau, and even Brewster and that kind of area, and because the winters were a little bit easier down here. And it's pretty fun to think about what got talked about in this cave. I think it's neat.
One of the things that you tried to do when you took over this ranch was to try to reconstitute the health of the soil.
Yep.
So tell me what you saw in the way the soil was operating here, and what kind of results did you try to achieve?
Yeah, so some of that, it was from, sort of my scientific curiosity about soils, and some of it was literally from economics. And so we, at that time, were farming the irrigated ground pretty traditionally. We were mostly raising alfalfa hay, and when we first got here, we actually had a farmer who was doing the farming for us, and did a great job, and no complaints there. But it was, it was inputs like fertilizer and herbicides, and that gets really expensive. And pretty soon those economics aren't working for you anymore. And I have turned those they're under pivot irrigation circles, into perennial pastures. When you put them out in this native range ground that has sort of 9 to 12 inches of precip a year, I was having to move them every 1 to 3 days into a new area, because it's a little bit fragile when it's growing. And so that's time consuming. Like, it gets hard to do that well. And so now the cows are here during the growing season, and then they can be out on the range ground on that good grass out there when it's dormant, because when it's dormant, you don't damage the grasses, because they're not like, they don't get bitten off and then try to hurry and grow back. They just get bitten off and there's nothing, and then the cows move on naturally. So I've changed things around so that I can use both, but I can run twice as many cows on this irrigated ground as I could have out on the range ground. So even though it's much smaller acreages. So when I first planted, after we changed from sort of, an alfalfa operation to just grazing, the grass that I seeded out here didn't look great. And I was like, oh my gosh, because the nutrients had already been sort of sucked out of the ground. And so then when I started, as you can see, the cows are close together, and started rotationally grazing the cows through, so their manure added organic matter back to the soil. Grass needs a disturbance, like it needs to either be burned or nipped or mowed or something for it to signal to grow again. And so them eating the grass, and then me giving the grass time to come back, made these pastures just really come back to life. And we're learning a lot about like the biology in the soil. And for example, cow's saliva has bacteria in it that's important for the microbes in the ground.
Really?
Yeah, and it's a very symbiotic relationship. And so if you don't have that microbial activity in the soils, you don't have, you know, good growth from grass. And so it's been really fun watching this place spring back to life. When those fields started getting healthier, and by healthier, I mean a wide range of plant species that are out there, the first thing that came back was amphibians that I hadn't seen since I had gotten here. And, you know, we had woodhouse toads, we have salamanders, we have tree frogs, we have all kinds of amphibians, and they're always kind of the canary in the coal mine, right, to tell you that you've got something wrong. So to see them come back with doing nothing other than not putting chemical inputs out there and seeding it into grasses was pretty exciting to me. Biodiversity is important above ground, and it's important in the soil. There's more biodiversity in the soil as far as, you know, fungi, microbes, bacteria. It's cool because there's the same predator-prey relationship going on below the ground. There's predators eating the prey species, and that's feeding the plants, and as there is on, you know, above ground, which is really fascinating. And we don't think about what's going on under our feet at all. And it's probably even more fascinating than what's going on above ground. And well, if you're a nerd, I guess, maybe. With the cattle specifically, we're seeing much higher weaning rates on the calves. One thing, and we can measure some of that, which is nice. So it's not just a sort of a sense of it. The butter fat in these cows' milk, even in the beef cow's milk, is way higher on these diverse pasture mixes that they're eating on out here. And so higher butter content in milk creates a bigger calf every time. And that you just don't get if you're feeding hay or silage. And so there's that benefit. The moms are in such good condition that they breed back very well every year. So you get higher conception rates when the nutrients are high. And that's really important to your bottom line, to make sure that you get every one of those cows bred, because, you know, that's a basically year-long process. And so if you get to the end of that year and you don't get a calf out of that cow, well, she's just cost you a bunch of money without giving back. And so being able to increase those is really important to your bottom line as a rancher. This coming winter, we're going to try a vacation.
Nice.
We've already freaking out about it a little bit. But the thing is like, I mean, time's just going to go by and we've not have enjoyed, you know, some things that he wants to do, because I'm content every day here. Like, if I didn't have to go to the store to buy beer, I wouldn't leave the ranch.
The solution to that is you learn how to make beer?
Mead is what I'm trying to learn how to make, because we have a lot of honey on the ranch. You know?
I had my suspicions.